The air in the hallway feels thick, colder than the late summer outside. I stand by the closed door, listening to the muffled sounds from inside the dining room. His voice, usually steady, is high-pitched, ragged. Then, a sound like furniture scraping violently, followed by a heavy thud. Silence. A cold, silent space opens up inside me. Not fear, not pity, but something like the quiet satisfaction of a trap sprung. He always underestimated me. He always thought I was softer, dumber, less aware than I was. He thought I wouldn't find out, or if I did, that I would crumble neatly, maybe cry, maybe ask for a settlement he could easily afford. He never imagined I'd look at the paper trail, follow the digital breadcrumbs, and see the crime beneath the cliché betrayal. He certainly never imagined I'd use the federal government's definition of wire fraud as my weapon. Now, behind that door, the man who built a life on lies, funded another woman's existence with money siphoned from ours, lies collapsed on the floor, blindsided by a reckoning he never saw coming. If you've ever felt underestimated, or if this story hits close to home, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Our life before felt like a quiet coast. Not dramatic waves, just the gentle, predictable tide coming in and out. We had built a comfortable existence, brick by brick, year by year. The house, the cars, the shared history stretching back 2 decades. He was a creature of habit, solid, reliable, I thought. Early riser, coffee black, newspaper folded just so at the breakfast table. My world revolved around my work, our home, the comfortable rhythm of our routines. Dinner together most nights, quiet evenings on the sofa, weekends spent on mundane tasks or visiting family. There wasn't grand passion, perhaps, but there was a deep, unspoken understanding, a shared history etched into the very walls of our home. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my partner, the man I built my entire adult life beside. I saw the small things, of course, the way he sometimes seemed distracted, lost in thought, the late nights at the office that stretched a little longer than they used to, the phone that was always face down, always on silent. But I rationalized it away. Stress from work, I told myself. He's providing for us. This is just the quiet evolution of a long marriage. You settle into comfort. The need for constant reassurance fades. Or so I believed. I remember sitting on the porch swing, the late afternoon sun warm on my face, watching him tinker in the garden, a familiar, comforting sight. The scent of freshly cut grass, the distant sound of a lawnmower, the feeling of absolute, unquestioning security. This was my life. This was what we had built. It felt sturdy, permanent. A fortress of predictability against the chaos of the world. I never looked for cracks because I never believed they could exist in something so fundamentally sound. My days were full, busy with the details of my own work, managing the household, the quiet hum of a life lived in tandem. I paid the bills, balanced the budget, kept the household running like a well-oiled machine. He handled his business affairs, I handled the home and our joint expenses. It was a division of labor that worked, one I never questioned. He'd give me his credit card statements, I'd pay them. Simple, trusting, blind. The first crack was almost imperceptible. A line item on a joint credit card statement I was reconciling. A recurring payment to an online retailer I didn't recognize. It wasn't a large amount, not at first. Maybe a few $100s every month. Easily overlooked amidst the groceries, the utilities, the everyday expenses of life. But it snagged my attention like a loose thread on a favorite sweater. It wasn't his usual online shopping. He bought electronics, tools, things with clear purposes. These were different. More personal. Clothing, gifts, things that didn't fit into the predictable pattern of his purchases. I remember staring at the screen, the numbers blurring slightly. My first thought wasn't infidelity. It was much more mundane. A scam? Was someone using his card? I brought it up casually one evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner. "Hey," I said, rinsing a plate, "what's this charge on the statement? This Serenity Gifts?" He paused, his back to me as he dried a pan. A fractional hesitation that I wouldn't have noticed a week before, but now, looking back, felt monumental. "Oh, that," he said, his voice just a little too smooth. "Just some things for the office. Supplies." "You know, supplies? From Serenity Gifts?" It sounded like a spa or a florist, not an office supply store. But I didn't push. The explanation, weak as it was offered. I accepted it. Because accepting it was easier than questioning it further. Because questioning it meant disturbing the quiet coast of my life. I made a mental note, though. A tiny flicker of unease in the vast, calm ocean of my trust. The supplies, charges kept appearing, growing larger over time. From a few hundred, they crept up, sometimes thousands a month. And they weren't just from Serenity Gifts anymore. Other names popped up. High-end boutiques, travel sites, restaurants I knew he didn't frequent, purchases made in cities he hadn't visited for work. The vague unease began to sharpen into something else, something cold and heavy in my gut. I started paying closer attention, meticulously reviewing the statements, cross-referencing dates, trying to piece together a pattern. He was using the joint accounts. Our accounts. The money we earned together, saved together, planned our future with. The feeling of being a detective in my own home was surreal. I'd wait until he was asleep, or out, before I'd pore over bank statements, credit card bills, his email accounts if I could access them. Each new charge was a fresh betrayal, a small, sharp cut. The silence in the house at night felt oppressive, filled with the secrets I was uncovering. I saw charges for flights to places he said he was on business trips for, but the timing was slightly off, or the destination felt wrong. I saw hotel bills that didn't match his company's usual lodging. I saw payments to a specific apartment complex in a nearby town. Not rent, but smaller, irregular payments. What were these? Who were they for? The picture forming was fragmented, confusing, but undeniably sinister. The financial aspect was terrifying. How much money was this? Over how long? Was our financial security eroding beneath my feet without me knowing? The sleepless nights became the norm. I'd lie awake, the numbers spinning in my head, the names of places I didn't know, the creeping realization that the man sleeping beside me was leading a double life. The fear wasn't just about the infidelity anymore, though that was a deep, aching wound. It was about the calculated deception, the financial entanglement, the sheer scale of it that was slowly revealing itself. I felt a profound sense of disorientation. The ground beneath me felt unstable. I was walking through fog, bumping into hard, unpleasant truths I couldn't fully grasp. I tried talking to him again, armed with more specific details. I picked a moment that felt calm, neutral. Saturday morning, after breakfast. "I need to talk to you about the credit cards," I started, trying to keep my voice level. "There are a lot of charges I don't understand. They don't look like business expenses." He stiffened, the subtle shift in his posture screaming guilt before he even spoke. He tried to dismiss it again, wave it away. "Work stuff. Things are complicated right now." His eyes avoided mine. I pushed harder, showing him a printout of some of the charges. The apartment payments, the travel, the recurring gifts. His face paled. The casual facade crumbled. He didn't confess. Not fully. He offered a tangled web of excuses. Helping a friend. An investment that went wrong. Business associates. The lies piled on top of each other, clumsy and desperate. They weren't convincing. They didn't explain the purchases, the locations, the consistent pattern. The conversation ended not with truth, but with anger. His anger. A defensive explosion, turning the focus onto me. Why was I checking up on him? Didn't I trust him? He twisted it, making me feel like the aggressor, the suspicious, nosy wife. I retreated, shaken. The confrontation hadn't brought clarity, only confirmation of his deceit, delivered not through confession, but through defensive rage. The house became a battleground of silent accusations. We moved through our routines like strangers sharing a cramped space, the air thick with unspoken words and festering lies. I felt utterly alone. Who could I talk to? Admitting this meant shattering the image of our life, our marriage, to friends and family. Shame wrapped around me, cold and tight. I continued my secret investigation, driven by a frantic need to understand the full extent of the damage. I found more accounts, more payments. The pattern solidified. Regular, substantial payments to one specific woman. Her name appeared on travel bookings, utility bills for that apartment, even car payments. It wasn't just expenses for her. He was paying her entire life. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. The woman had a name, an address, a digital footprint I could now trace. The Mistress. Not a faceless entity, but a real person, living a life of comfort, funded by my husband, with our money. The depth of the betrayal shifted. It wasn't just sex, or even emotional connection. It was a tangible, financial investment in another woman's existence, prioritized over our own security, our own future. This wasn't just infidelity. This felt like theft. Like embezzlement from the partnership we were supposed to be. The financial picture grew bleaker the deeper I dug. Savings accounts were depleted, lines of credit maxed out. He wasn't just paying her bills. He was jeopardizing our financial stability. The house, our supposed fortress, felt like it was built on sand. The panic was a constant, low-level hum beneath my skin. How could he do this? How could he gamble away our future, my future, for someone else? The emotional pain was a raw, open wound, but the fear for my financial security was a cold, paralyzing dread. I saw a lawyer, a standard divorce lawyer. I laid out the infidelity, the financial irregularities. He listened patiently, nodding. He talked about dividing assets, alimony, child support. We had no children, which simplified that. But when I pressed about the money spent on the Mistress, the years of funding her life, his answers were disappointing. Infidelity is a moral wrong, he explained, but rarely has a significant impact on asset division unless marital funds were wasted on it. And proving waste over years, across numerous transactions, it was difficult, murky. It might reduce his share of the assets, perhaps, but it wouldn't recover the money. The lawyer suggested focusing on a clean break, asset division, moving on. Recovery of the funds felt like a long shot, too complex, too expensive to pursue relative to what might be gained. I left his office feeling deflated, defeated. The system, it seemed, was set up to handle the end of a marriage, not the remediation of a calculated financial crime perpetrated within the marriage. The sense of injustice burned. He had stolen from us, from me, to fund another life, and the best the law could offer was splitting what was left? It didn't feel like justice. It didn't feel like recovery. It felt like letting him, and her, get away with it. The Mistress wasn't just a passive recipient. She was actively benefiting from funds she knew were coming from a married man. Was she complicit? Could she be held accountable? The standard legal paths seemed inadequate, designed for simpler betrayals. This felt bigger, dirtier, more fundamentally wrong. The despair deepened. I felt trapped between an impossible past and an uncertain future. The financial hole was significant, larger than I had initially feared. Retirement savings were impacted. Debts had accumulated. Every corner I turned revealed more of the damage. The house, once a symbol of security, now felt like a burden, its equity potentially needed to cover the debts he'd incurred. I was living with a stranger, a man whose lies were so pervasive they had poisoned every corner of our shared existence. The emotional toll was immense. I was losing weight, sleeping even less. The mask I wore in public, at work, felt heavy, suffocating. Friends noticed I was withdrawn, quiet. I mumbled excuses about stress. How could I explain that my entire reality had imploded, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a credit card transaction? The feeling of being a victim was overwhelming. A victim of his lies, his betrayal, his reckless financial decisions. The conventional wisdom seemed to be, cut your losses, get out, rebuild. But the thought of simply walking away, leaving him and the woman he'd funded to enjoy the benefits of their deception, felt unbearable. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though the financial precariousness was terrifying. It was about the principle. The years of calculated lies, the sheer disrespect, the way he had so casually dismantled our shared life to build another. I felt a bitter resentment towards the mistress too. She must have known. She must have. How could she accept expensive gifts, travel, rent, car payments, knowing he was married? Was she just using him? Or were they partners in this deception? The conventional legal path offered no real recourse against her. She wasn't married to him. She hadn't signed any papers. She was just the mistress. But she had benefited directly, substantially, from funds that were, in part, mine. The thought gnawed at me. There had to be a way. There had to be something more than just dissolving a failed marriage. One restless night, scrolling through legal forums, researching financial crimes, a term surfaced repeatedly in complex fraud cases: wire fraud. It applied to schemes that used interstate wires, like online bank transfers, credit card transactions, emails, to perpetuate a fraudulent act. My husband's pattern of funding the mistress involved countless such transactions over years. Payments made online, transfers between accounts, credit card payments processed electronically. Was this just marital misconduct? Or was it something more? Was it a fraudulent scheme to deprive the marital estate, and thus me, of funds, using electronic means? The thought sparked like a flint in the darkness. It shifted my perspective entirely. This wasn't just a husband having an affair and spending too much. This was potentially a calculated, ongoing financial deception executed through digital channels. It wasn't just against me emotionally. It was potentially a crime against our shared finances, facilitated by technology. This wasn't about proving adultery for a better divorce settlement. This was about proving a deliberate act of fraud. Could the mistress, who received the funds via these same electronic means, also be implicated? She was the direct beneficiary of the alleged fraud. The thought felt audacious, maybe even crazy. But the standard divorce lawyer hadn't seen it. They were looking through the lens of family law, not financial crime. I needed a different kind of lawyer. Someone who understood complex financial transactions, who wasn't afraid to look beyond the obvious. I started searching again, this time using different keywords: financial fraud, wire fraud attorney, recovering embezzled funds marriage. It was a slow, painstaking process, wading through legal jargon, contacting firms that specialized in white-collar crime, explaining a situation that felt deeply personal but needed to be framed as a cold, hard legal case. Many firms weren't interested. It wasn't big enough, or it was too messy, too tied up in domestic relations. But I persisted. I was no longer fueled by just hurt or fear. A cold, quiet determination had settled in. This wasn't about patching things up, or even getting a fair divorce settlement in the traditional sense. This was about holding them accountable for the systematic deception and recouping what was stolen. This was about turning the tables, using the very tools they used for their deceit, the electronic transactions, as the evidence against them. I felt a shift within me, from hunted to hunter, from victim to strategist. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it was now channeled into a focused, relentless energy. I found her, a lawyer with a reputation for taking on complex financial cases, described as sharp, tenacious, and unconventional. Her office was modern, sterile, a stark contrast to the cozy, familiar space of my home that now felt tainted. I sat across from her, laying out the years of statements, the spreadsheets I'd meticulously created, the names, the addresses, the dates. I explained my theory. Not just infidelity, but a scheme to defraud the marital estate using electronic transfers, potentially constituting wire fraud. She listened intently, her gaze sharp, analytical. She asked precise, technical questions about the transactions, the sources of the money, the methods of payment. She wasn't focused on the emotional narrative, but the financial mechanics. This wasn't like talking to the first lawyer. She saw the pattern immediately. She saw the potential legal angle. She confirmed that using interstate wires for a scheme to defraud could fall under federal wire fraud statutes, which carry significant penalties, including restitution to victims. And yes, the beneficiary of the fraud could potentially be named as a defendant, especially if they knew the funds were obtained through fraudulent means. The sheer scale and duration of the payments made it difficult for the mistress to claim ignorance. This wasn't pocket money. This was funding her life. The cold certainty in the lawyer's voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. It wasn't crazy. It was a legitimate legal strategy. It was aggressive. It was risky. It would mean taking on not just my husband, but the mistress directly, accusing them both of a serious financial crime. But it offered a path to something more than just a divorce settlement. It offered a path to potential full financial restitution, to holding them both fully accountable, not just for the moral failing, but for the concrete financial damage they had inflicted. The cost would be high financially and emotionally. It would make the divorce contentious, public. But the alternative was walking away, broken and financially depleted, while they potentially faced no real consequences for their actions. The choice felt clear, born of months of pain and a hardened resolve. This was the fight I had to fight. Not for revenge, not really, though a part of me craved that. But for justice. For recovery. For the affirmation that what they did was wrong. On every level. I gave the lawyer the go-ahead. The process began quietly, meticulously. Building the case, compiling the evidence, preparing the lawsuit. It was a tense waiting period, living in the same house as the man I was preparing to accuse of a federal crime, maintaining a facade of something. Numbness, mostly. The house felt like a bomb waiting to explode. The day the lawsuit was filed was strangely quiet. No fanfare, just an email confirming the documents had been submitted. The real tension was waiting for the papers to be served. My lawyer handled it, ensuring it would happen professionally, legally. She advised me not to be present, to avoid any potential confrontation. The lawsuit named both my husband and the mistress as defendants, alleging a scheme to defraud, specifically citing wire fraud based on the electronic transfers. The sheer weight of the charge was immense. This wasn't a divorce petition. It was a federal lawsuit alleging financial crime. My lawyer arranged for the papers to be served on him at his office. She didn't tell me exactly when, just that it would happen soon. The waiting was agonizing, a coiled spring in my chest. I went to work, trying to focus, but my mind was a million miles away, picturing the scene. The process server arriving, the formal delivery of the heavy envelope detailing the allegations. My husband, in the environment where he projected an image of success and integrity, being served with papers accusing him of a calculated fraud. The irony was sharp, like glass. And then the call. My lawyer's voice was calm, professional.
"He's been served," she said.
At his office. There was an incident. She described how the process server had delivered the documents. My husband had taken the envelope, his face going blank as he saw the name of the law firm and the court. He'd signed for it mechanically. Then, as he scanned the first page, the word fraud, the names of the defendants, his and hers, the color drained from his face.
"He made a sound," she said, a sort of choked gasp.
He stumbled back from his desk, clutching the papers, his eyes wide and unseeing. His secretary, alarmed, rushed over. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just
crumpled, collapsed.
Onto the floor of his pristine office, the lawsuit papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. Paramedics were called.
He was taken away.
The secretary had called my lawyer, assuming I should be notified. I listened to my lawyer's description, the phone pressed tight against my ear. My hands were shaking, but my core felt like ice. Not triumphant, not happy, but a deep, unsettling calm. He hadn't seen it coming. He'd been prepared for a divorce, maybe a fight over assets. But not this. Not a federal lawsuit. Not the accusation of wire fraud. Not the naming of his mistress as a co-defendant, exposing their scheme to the harsh light of the legal system. He thought he was untouchable, that his secrets were safe, that I was incapable of finding this path, of wielding this kind of weapon. The plot twist wasn't just that I found out, it was how I fought back. Using the law, using the very financial system he manipulated, to turn his calculated deception into his undoing. His physical collapse wasn't a victory I relished in a cruel sense. It was the stark, undeniable consequence of his actions finally catching up to him in a way he was utterly unprepared for. The years of lies, the careful construction of a double life, the casual betrayal of trust, It had all culminated in this single, shattering moment of truth he could not withstand. The trap was sprung. He was caught. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings, depositions, the cold, factual unpacking of years of emotional and financial deception. My husband was, for a time, incapacitated. The lawsuit proceeded. The mistress, blindsided and facing serious legal exposure, hired her own lawyer. The wire fraud allegation stood. The evidence was undeniable, the electronic trail of money flowing from our joint accounts to fund her life. There was no hiding from the bank statements, the credit card bills, the online transfer records. The sheer volume and consistency of the payments over years painted a clear picture of a deliberate, ongoing scheme. Facing the potential consequences of a federal case, including significant financial penalties and legal fees, negotiation became inevitable. There was no quick, clean resolution. It was a long, arduous process, peeling back layers of financial entanglement. The money wasn't all recovered immediately, or easily. Assets had to be traced, accounts frozen, properties potentially liquidated. It was a constant reminder of the cost of his actions, and hers. The divorce felt almost secondary to the financial fraud case. The marriage was clearly over, dissolved not just by betrayal, but by the clinical details of legal discovery. The emotional scars remained, deep and permanent. Trust, once broken in such a fundamental way, can never be fully rebuilt. The house, eventually, had to be sold. It no longer felt like a home, but a monument to deception. Winning the legal battle, securing a significant portion of the restitution, wasn't a moment of pure joy. It was a cold vindication. A recognition by the system that what happened wasn't just a messy, personal failure, but a wrong that had tangible, legal consequences. I had stood up for myself, for my financial security, for the principle of accountability, when the easier path would have been to simply walk away with less. The process changed me. The trusting, perhaps naive woman who believed in the quiet coast of her life was gone, replaced by someone harder, more wary, but also stronger. I learned the power of information, the cold logic of finance, and the unexpected strength found in hitting rock bottom and deciding to fight your way back up. The money recovered helped rebuild my financial life, providing a foundation for a new beginning. But the years lost, the emotional toll, the shattering of a fundamental belief in the person I shared my life with, those costs were incalculable. My life now is quieter in a different way. Not the quiet comfort of perceived security, but the deliberate quiet of independence, of rebuilding on solid ground I built myself. The experience left me with a deep understanding of how easily appearances can deceive, and how sometimes the most devastating betrayals aren't loud and dramatic, but silent and financial, hidden in plain sight on a credit card statement. But it also taught me that even in the darkest moments, armed with truth and determination, you can find a way to turn the tables, to reclaim what was stolen, and to stand firm when everything you thought was solid collapses beneath you. If this story hit close to home, if you faced betrayal or had to fight for what's rightfully yours, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.